Hello everyone, I'm Asha Nayaswami, and I want to read to you an excerpt from my soon-to-be-published book, Swami Kriyananda, Lightbearer, The Life and Legacy of a Disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda. The book is about 45 chapters, and each chapter is 1 year, chronologically, and within each chapter I go sequentially through the significant events and occurrences of that year from my perspective. By no means can I cover everything that he did, but I had a little window onto his life, and that's what I'm sharing. So this excerpt is from the year 1991, which in the history of not just Ananda, but of the world, was significant because America went to war against Iraq at that period of time. I know now there's just so many conflicts in so many places, it's hard to keep track. But when America declared war on Iraq, that was a really big event and very traumatic for many Americans because we hadn't really been at war in a very long time. And it was upsetting to the community. So here's what happened. Also in January, the United States went to war with Iraq. The country was divided. Many did not agree with our president's decision. The very idea that we were now at war was disturbing to the community. Swamiji called a meeting to address it. He said, "At this time in history, there is much emotional opposition to war. At the same time, the consciousness of mankind as a whole is not moving toward peace, but toward greater violence. You see it in the movies. You hear it in popular music. Worldwide, there is rioting and unrest. On some deep level, it seems to me, the human race wants a war or an explosion of some kind. When such waves of emotion move through the mass consciousness, people eventually get what they want." You know, this was now, almost 30 years ago that Swamiji wrote this, and the directions that he described there just keep barreling on, and the directions he describes are quite consistent, unfortunately, with predictions that Master made about times of great turmoil in the world. Timing, however, in prophecy is very difficult. So, but what Swamiji says, based on what happened in January of 1991, is extremely relevant to what the world is facing now, which is among the reasons why I chose to read this now. So going along with what Swami said at that satsang, we think of ourselves as free, but we are part of a larger destiny. Our freedom as human beings is only the ability to ride in the front or the back of a moving train. The world is coming into a new age. People must come to grips with it, or find themselves and their habitual ways of thinking plowed under for a new planting. Such changes have occurred before, causing intense conflict for a time until people adjust to new and broader realities. Is love a sufficient power in itself to bring about the needed changes? Yes, if enough people open themselves fully to that power. In the Indian scriptures it says, "One moon gives more light than all the stars." Even a few saintly men and women balance out the violent tendencies of many thousands, even of millions. In places where people meditate deeply, even worldly people feel a tangible peace. Thus, the importance of personal transformation, as opposed to seeking only political solutions. You know, I'm reminded in this of a conversation, an incident that happened in a completely separate context. I was traveling with Swamiji and a group. We were on a group pilgrimage in Italy, and we went to Siena, if I'm correct. Where it happened is less important, but I believe it was in Siena. But the priest was, St. Catherine of Siena was a powerful force there. Now let me think. You know, it wasn't in Siena because there was no known saint in the city that was described. So it was a city in Italy. We went to a church, and the priest told us about some miraculous thing that had happened at a certain point, and I think he showed us even a wafer, one of the Holy Host. And he talked about a time when the sanctified Holy Host had been stolen, which, inasmuch as to devout Catholic, it represents the body of Christ. It was like having Jesus himself stolen. So it was a terrible, upsetting experience for all of the devout Catholics in the city. And this I think took place sometime in history, so almost everyone was a devout Catholic. So the townspeople were so upset that they all began to pray. And then in some miraculous way, the stolen host was returned. I never heard that the thief repented and brought it back. It was just in some way the stolen host was miraculously restored. And the priest represented that as the power of a lot of people praying. And it was interesting, Swami didn't dispute the priest at the moment, but later he remarked, he said, even thousands of people without much spiritual power cannot merely by their sheer numbers create a miracle. He said there must have been a few saintly people praying, and it was their power that created the miracle. It's a very interesting and subtle point, because otherwise we tend to think if you just get a lot of people in the room, there's going to be an automatic upliftment by the sheer numbers. But we don't understand that power is the power of consciousness and vibration. So even if you have thousands of people, they will never be able to lift the situation higher than their own consciousness. But as he quotes here, the one moon gives more light than all the stars. One saint can lift the energy to a completely different vibration. So whatever I garbled about the story about the Holy Host, the point was made. And this is what Swamiji is trying to say here. Yes, love is sufficient power if enough people open themselves fully to that love. And this was because in the context of the Iraq War, the pacifist position, the no war at any cost, if we just love our enemies, that will be enough. It's those kinds of points of view are not so simple to parse apart for a devotee, where ahimsa is such a powerful value. And that was why Swami spoke as he did. Going on. So he's saying, thus the importance of personal transformation, meaning that we actually become channels for a higher vibration and a higher consciousness, as opposed to seeking only political situations in which we just change circumstances and have no capacity to change consciousness. Swami goes on to say, at the same time, as Master once scolded me with wry humor, you must be practical in your idealism. Love has the power to conquer, repeating this again, love has the power to conquer all, but few people have developed in themselves the power to love so greatly. Naturally, we'd like to come to a new plateau of civilization without war, but peace must sometimes be won by hard struggle. Even the scriptures say there is a need at times for righteous war. An example would be our own War of Independence. This is 1776. Out of that sacrifice, look at the great good that has come. Could America's freedom have been won by peaceful means? Not likely. People weren't ready for such a step. Freedom, however, was too vital an issue to be set aside with the excuse that no one wanted to fight. We must stand up in practical ways for high principles. To do so, we must use the means available. I haven't much respect for those who hold peace as a higher value than truth or freedom. Those who have tried to live by that belief lost not only truth and freedom, but peace itself. Is the present war in Iraq a righteous war? Honestly, I'm not in a position to say. I can see some reasons for it, including our commitment to defend that region. Certainly, however, governments make mistakes, just as individuals do. There are good and bad people in all countries. No government, moreover, is all good or all bad. In a relative world, however, it is ridiculous to say that the mere fact that evil exists everywhere means that its magnitude is the same everywhere. Under communism, for example, since 1917, an estimated 130 million people have been murdered as the official policy of the government. To say, we are just as bad in America, is either incredibly naive or willfully disloyal. America, for all her faults, is the spearhead for the light struggling gamely to come into the world. It may well be that this war is part of the divine plan to destroy fanaticism and other old ways of behavior. That is not a judgment I am in a position to make. The struggle today is between overarching concepts such as love, universal tolerance, and understanding on the one hand, and self-limiting attitudes on the other, such as selfish pride, intolerance, and bigotry. The real war is between the forces of light and darkness. War in the Middle East is only symptomatic of this broader struggle. I think we are in the hands of a larger destiny than our little minds can comprehend. There's a few more things I want to say, just in editorializing on what Swamiji on what Swamiji said in January of 1991. You know, at some time in the 80s, I think it was, there was a spiritual teacher named Sant Keshavadas. He's now long since left the planet, but he was a very wonderful contributing teacher in the whole movement in America through the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. And he and Swami Kriyananda had a great deal of love and respect for each other, and he came to have lunch with Swami Kriyananda at Crystal Hermitage, and it was often my habit then, my opportunity then to cook when there were guests. So I cooked and I sat at the lunch table with them. And Santji, as he was called, and Swamiji were conversing about many interesting aspects of the spiritual path. But they both began to talk about the Master's predictions of hard times, the shifting from a lower age to a higher age, the inevitable conflict of values that would create. Sant Keshavadas was well versed in the Indian tradition of the yugas and was in a good position to comment, and himself had his own prophetic understanding of what was going to come. But what they discussed was so relevant not only to 1991, but even more to this point. Santji said, before there is an actual confrontation between light and darkness, he said, darkness will fight with itself. And in that way, darkness will gradually weaken itself so that when finally it is light against darkness, light will be able to prevail, because we are moving into an ascending age of greater consciousness. So the ultimate result will be an upliftment of consciousness, which is what you see all over the planet, but simultaneously you see this reactive force of darkness as the struggle takes place. Now, I've always remembered that, and it helped me to understand my own position at the present time and that of many meditating, uplifted people that I know, that there's all this conflict going on in the world, but it's very difficult to figure out where a person with values such as my own can take a stand, because they're in most situations it's very difficult to see exactly where light is, because even those who are on opposite sides of the question are often operating from the same with the same vibration. Their values may be different, so you may lift one above the other, but there's a certain egoic intolerance which is ultimately not going to lead to the solutions we want. Now, quite apart from that thought, that's an incidental thought, I myself, who have really almost nothing to do with the political world, like Swamiji said, I'm just not in a position to know, At the same time, I feel like I am one of the most politically active people that I know, because all of the difficulties in the world are a question of consciousness. And if we can change consciousness, everything follows from that. And in my life work of sharing the principles of self-realization and teaching people to meditate, I feel I'm working right at the fundamental level to shift consciousness, which will ultimately change everything. The first time I went to India was in 1987, and it was the first time I'd seen overpopulation and poverty on that level, and especially in 1987, that was just before India really began its magnificent upward ascension to take its place, as Swami said, as one of the most important countries in the world. Looking out the window, I thought to myself, we have all the resources, this is 87, we have all the resources, we have all the technology, we have all the ability to solve every problem we have in the world. What we lack is the will to do it. And the will to do it means the selfless willingness to think first of the welfare of others and not only of my own desires. And that is consciousness. Change consciousness and we change everything. God bless you.